Good day. My name is Jada Perino, and this is my presentation entitled The Weight of History in the Yellow Wallpaper. Now, if you're like every other human being, and if you're like me when I first read the story, you're probably wondering, what does wallpaper have to do with history? Well, a lot more than you'd expect. This haunting story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman may be wrapped in lace and literary style, but beneath it lies an indictment. And it's a fierce coded rebellion against a culture that silenced women into complete madness. Gilman didn't just write a story, but she documented a war on the female mind. Now, for us to completely understand what we're talking about, let me give you a brief overview of the story. So, the yellow wallpaper tells the story of an unnamed woman suffering from postpartum depression. Her husband, whose name is John, is also her doctor, and this is quite an important point. And he isolates her in a room and forbids her from writing or engaging her mind. And this was known as the rescue. Over time, cut off from intellectual stimulation and social contact, she begins to obsess over the yellow wallpaper in the room. And she believes there's a woman trapped behind it. And in the end, she comes to believe that she is that woman. The story is absolutely chilling, not only because of its psychological unraveling, but because of how closely it mirrors Gilman's real life experiences. So, in this presentation, we will be speaking about the historical and medical context behind the story. We will be speaking about elements such as the patriarchal diagnoses of that era, how women's voices are silenced, the symbolism of the wallpaper, and the economic and emotional forces that held women captive. In the end, we'll examine Gilman's literary form itself as a political tool. So, let's begin. So, as I alluded to, this story was published in the 19th century. And this presentation will explore how this short story becomes a psychological, social, and historical manifesto of rebellion. Now, when speaking about medical patriarchy and diagnoses at that time, which is a big component of this story, we need to understand that female pain was often dismissed and misdiagnosed. Diagnoses like hysteria and neurasthenia were common, and they carried no clear symptoms, just the vague message, that women were too emotional. Gilman critiques this head on, as the narrator says. John says the very worst thing I can do is think about my condition. This isn't just a husband being insensitive. This is medical patriarchy in action. This slide reminds us that silence was not just a condition, but it was a prescription. As you can see in this slide entitled The Rescue, a Historical Weapon, this rescue was a dominant treatment of that era, especially for middle class white women. Dr. Mitchell, who treated Gilman herself, prescribed it as a cure for any signs of nervousness. It mandated total rest, and that meant total rest, meaning no writing, no reading, no form of stimulation whatsoever. Gilman later said it nearly drove her insane. Her narrator experienced the same imposed stillness, revealing that this cure was never about healing. It was about erasing female voice and intellect. The author herself said, when going back and examining her work in the yellow wallpaper, this story was not intended to drive people crazy, but to save people from being driven crazy. Now, our next slide, entitled The Silencing of Voice and Mind, illustrates how Gilman constructs a character who is silenced under the guise of love. Isn't that really, really interesting? John, who as the husband and physician embodies dual authority. The narrator observes he is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. Gilman is critiquing a system where domination is hidden beneath affectionate concern. Her voice isn't taken violently, it's stolen gently. I'll repeat that again because this is so interesting. Her voice isn't taken violently. He didn't use violence to take her voice. It's stolen gently. Her silence is designed, prescribed, and enforced in the name of protection. Does this still happen today? In this slide entitled The Cult of True Womanhood, and this is based on a study, and you will find the references in the end slide. The 19th century ideal, known as the cult of womanhood, celebrated traits like purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Gilman turns these ideals into a trap. The narrator is confined to a room that's supposed to symbolize care, but it becomes her cage. As said in the story, I lie here on this great immovable bed. It is nailed down, I believe, and follow the pattern about by the hour. She feels totally trapped. The home is not a refuge, it's a prison locked with gender expectations. The wallpaper as a cultural metaphor. This slide features the story's most disturbing symbol, the wallpaper. It becomes a living metaphor for the entangled, inescapable systems that govern the narrator's world. She writes, when you follow the lame and certain curves, they suddenly commit suicide. These words reflect how the madness of her surrounding mirrors the madness within. The wallpaper is the cultural pattern women are expected to follow. It is confusing, it is contradictory, and it is deadly to selfhood. In addition to this, there was economic dependency as entrapment. As indicated on this slide, Gilman also critiques women's lack of economic freedom. In the 19th century, women had no legal control over property, over wages, over even their own movements once married. Voting? So funny. The right to vote? Funny. The narrator says, I have a scheduled prescription for each hour in the day. He takes all care from me. She's financially and physically immobilized. Gilman reveals how dependency in built into the structure of womanhood, ensuring the escape is not just unthinkable, but unaffordable. As this slide reminds us, Gilman's most chilling insight is how affection disguises oppression. This one hit me like a ton of bricks. She says, he takes all care from me. It sounds loving until we realize it removes every last ounce of autonomy. Gilman critiques not just patriarchy rules, but the emotional language that makes those rules seem humane. Control doesn't need to be brutal to be complete. Here, in the slide entitled Madness as Awakening, we see Gilman's revolutionary reframing of madness, not as weakness, but as insight. In the final moments, the narrator tears down the wallpaper and declares, I've got out at last and I've pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. This is not collapse, it's rebellion. Gilman is saying that when the world makes no space for your voice, sometimes the only sane response is to go mad on your own terms. The form and the style of protest. As shown on this slide, even Gilman's writing style is political. The diary format is fragmented and confessional, and it mirrors both the narrator's unraveling and the social chaos she's trapped in. Through this secretive voice, Gilman critiques a literary canon that excluded women's experience. Her form becomes her rebellion. So we've spoken about a lot, but here are some key takeaways. We are reminded in this slide that the yellow wallpaper is more than a story. It's a scream written in ink. It critiques an entire society that punished women for thinking, feeling, and creating. Gilman's work stands as a revolutionary document, one that reveals how madness can be truth, how silence can be systematic, and how literature can rewrite history. Thank you so much for listening. Here are the references. Thank you so much.